Spring is coming to the Bogongs high plains in the heart of the Australian Alps. The long sleep of winter is over. The mountain residents are emerging to feed on the new growth, or be fed on in their turn. Some have struggled all winter long to scratch a living from beneath the snow. Others have just arrived. The high plains are hardly a land of plenty, but this year will be different. In the space of a few short nights, a feast will descend on these rocky peaks like manna from heaven, a natural miracle born on millions of beating wings from the hot, dry plains far to the north. It's been a cool, wet winter on the rolling sweep of the Darling Downs. First light, a moment of calm before the dawn assault. Deep in the linseed, blissfully unaware of their peril, a million tiny mouths are hard at work. Cutworms. They're all Australian eating machines that once fed only on native plants. But they've adaptable tastes. Wheat and barley, cabbage and cauliflower are now grist to the mill of their mandibles. They've always had to cope with natural predators. But as the light strengthens, a far more dangerous foe launches his attack. Across broad swathes of eastern Australia, the caterpillars, some years, become a plague. Millions perish in the poisonous rain. With full daylight, the survivors begin to burrow, programmed by their genes to flee an enemy that's older than pesticide and more deadly than birds. The searing heat of the Australian sun. As summer approaches and the earth begins to bake, the soil grows warmer, the night air balmier. Safe underground, the surviving caterpillars have embarked on the next stage of their remarkable life cycle. Their bodies have turned to jelly and entirely rebuilt themselves. After 3 weeks, the metamorphosis is almost complete. The creature that emerges is no longer a simple eating machine. It has eyes and legs and an urgent instinct to escape. It must find a place to wait out the summer before it can mate and breed. It pumps fluid from its swollen abdomen into the brittle plates along its back. Within 20 minutes, they fill out and gradually dry. They are wings, delicately scaled, yet tough and powerful. The transformation is complete. The cutworm larva has become a bogong moth. Metamorphosis has used up all the energy gathered by the caterpillar's weeks of eating. The moths are ravenously hungry. They suck nectar from any flowering plant they can find, paying for the meal by transporting pollen from flower to flower. The moths must build up body fat and strength. There's not much time. The late spring storms are on the way, and the moths have a great journey to make. They sense the barometric pressure drop ahead of the advancing storm front. In their tens of millions, they take to the air. The night of the Bogongs has arrived. A 1,000 meters above ground, the wind is at its strongest, pushing the moths southeastwards at amazing speeds. Hundreds of kilometers are covered in a single night. A cloud of beating wings passes above the sleeping towns and homesteads. Since the end of the last ice age, 10,000 years ago, the Bogongs' ancestors have crossed this country. But in the last 80 or so, a human city has grown up in their path. In the hour before dawn, the lights of the national capital prove irresistible. Like a plague, they descend on sleeping Canberra.
Glad you could join us this morning. Canberra driver, smile your guests.
Fluorescent lights are high in ultraviolet and prove particularly enticing. One building in Canberra is flooded each night with mercury vapour lighting, which has the highest UV content of all. By dawn, Parliament House is festooned in Bogongs, sheltering from the coming daylight and from the enemies that are gathering to the feast. The crows and magpies, stuffed with 20 or 30 moths apiece, have time to frolic in the sun. Instinctively, the moths try to burrow away from the blinding light of day. The Bogongs crave shade and cool and darkness. Through air conditioning ducts and briefly opened doors, hundreds find their way into the corridors of power. They flutter unsuspecting even into the inner sanctum and disrupt the solemn rituals of question time.
And you like me, will be feeling just a little bit intimidated by the moths in Canberra. But I do rise to with a suggestion of a cure for the problem, and I listened with some interest yesterday to the President's attempts to get rid of the moth. Senator Reid.
But the majority of moths know their place, crowded together under parliamentary eaves, trying desperately to shelter their sensitive eyes from the sun. When disturbed, the bright light dazzles and disorients them. Canberra lies across the Bogongs' normal flight path, but they can end up in the strangest places, blown off course as far as New Zealand to the east or Melbourne to the south, interrupting far more important rituals than question time. At night, the moths steer by the moon and stars. Artificial light confuses them. They'll eagerly refuel on any sugary substance they can find. At last, they break free from the bewitching city lights and head for the looming darkness of the Australian Alps. For 2 or 3 weeks, they climb by night into the mountains. With no wind to help them, they fly low over the forest, feeding on flowering trees as they go. Higher and higher they climb, following the ancient migration routes, till they arrive at Journey's End, the plateau of the Bogong Plains. But there's no time to waste. The sun is coming. Like so many furry vampires, they scurry towards the darkness. They pour into the very same cracks and crevices their ancestors have used for hundreds of generations. These mountain hideaways are the only places deep and cool enough to protect the moths through the long, hot summer. And the deeper and cooler, the better. Now they must shove and jostle one another for a place in the dark. With each head pushed under its neighbour's wing, the moths nestle like roof tiles, as many as 17,000 to 1 square metre of granite wall. Those that have reached their mountain stronghold have left a trail of dead companions stretching all the way back to Queensland. And even here, high above the tree line, they're not out of danger. The dawn brings a strengthening wind, and riding on it, the predators. The birds are well aware that during the night, the miraculous banquet has arrived. The moths near the entrances to the caves and crevices are dangerously exposed, not only to the ravens, but to the wind. Funneled through natural flutes in the rock, it blows them deeper into the mountains. Most manage to haul themselves onto the crowded walls, where there's safety in numbers. The floor of the cave is a dangerous place to stay. Its layers of body fat were supposed to have nourished the moth all through the summer. For lizard and bird and spider, that fat is just as nourishing. The best hope of survival is to stay with the crowd. As night falls, there's no respite for the moths. only a change of shift among the predators. Along the dark corridors, the dusky Antechinus prowls. And Burramus, the mountain pygmy possum, waits in ambush. It's a cold weather specialist, restricted to an ever-shrinking habitat on the roof of Australia. The summer bounty of the Bogongs makes it easy to build up the fat it needs to protect it through the long, cold winters. High summer, for all the mountain residents, is the time of peak activity. A male corroboree frog is calling on females, stocking up as he goes on his favourite food to strengthen him for the coming bouts with rivals. After 7 months inside a frozen egg, grasshoppers must make the most of the brief summers. A male mountain grasshopper is hunting for a mate. She looks more like a beetle than a grasshopper, quite different from her suitor. But she's not impressed. He'll have to try his luck elsewhere. While out in the sunlight, hormones are raging. Deep in their havens, the bogong moths want only to be left in peace. Their task now is to wait and to survive until the blazing heat of summer has passed on the plains where they were born. At least up here in the high peaks, they're safe from human predators. But that wasn't always so. Before the arrival of the European, people came from every point in the compass to gather in the foothills. Yorta from the west, Ngunnawal from the north, Gunai and Omeo from the east and south. The great larder of fat and protein in the mountain caves could feed gatherings of hundreds for weeks. It was a time for initiations and ceremonies, songs and storytelling, trade and betrothals.
Look at this. Get out! Turn off the light. You may turn off the light. We won't have
The people who come to the mountains today are not so appreciative of the Bogongs. Sometimes, at sunset, great swarms of moths will suddenly pour out of the caves to stretch their wings. These evening flights of the Bogongs are still mysterious. A few will feed, but most seem not to. They're certainly not looking for a mate. And within 2 or 3 hours, they're jostling back into their granite lairs. Inevitably, there are casualties. Some moths venture down to the mountain creeks to sip moisture from the rocks. The year has turned. Each day the morning mists take longer to burn away. But still, inside the mountains, the moths must wait. Their main enemy now is time. Will their reserves of body fat last out? Those that have survived this long have little to fear from predators. Birds and reptiles and mammals are bloated with bogong flesh. But still, their numbers dwindle. Sheer starvation takes the moths that didn't eat enough in the early weeks of summer. In their death throes, they add to the piles of corpses 1/2 metre deep, the refuse of at least 1,000 summers. Now, at last, the waiting is almost over. Late summer storms are lashing the high country. It may be the first drink she's had since she arrived in the mountains 100 days and nights ago. It's time for the last and greatest effort. The long trek home. Individually now, the surviving moths creep into the open to warm their wing muscles in the last of the evening sun. Then, one by one, they take to the air and turn northwest. Sometimes there's a southerly breeze to help them. Often they'll fly low, battling headwinds, back over the cliffs and the wooded foothills, feeding on eucalyptus blossoms as they go. Back, night after night, over the plains, finding shelter and resting during the day. Back northwestwards, until finally they reach the patch of earth from which they'd crawled 7 months before. For every 1,000 moths that set off on the journey south, only 1 or 2 return. And this is what they've been waiting all these months to do. There's no need for elaborate courtship. Any moth that's made it back from the mountains must be a consummate survivor, whose genes are well worth sharing. The female makes off with the male's spermatophore, a parcel of sperm and nutrients containing his genetic legacy. As he passed it on, this male's intestines were torn from his body. He has only minutes to live. The female has one more vital task still to accomplish. Over the next few hours, she carefully chooses a site, a sheltered place where there's ready food at hand. Here she deposits up to 2,000 eggs. There are enough survivors to lay billions of eggs from southern Queensland to the Riverina. In each of them is encapsulated the strength and vigour of their parents, and the overpowering urge to reach the mountains and return. The female's mission is accomplished. The undertaker ants have buried millions of her peers. Most failed, but she has triumphed. The epic journey of her life has ensured that in the spring, the night of the Bogongs will return.